This is TWiT.
You would never expect something as apparently clean, simple, and beneficial as enabling DNS lookups over HTTPS to stir up any controversy. Seems like a good thing. We all know what a problem it is that despite every website we visit now being HTTPS with few exceptions, where its identity is authenticated because we trust the entity that signed its certificate asserting its identity, and all of the communications back and forth are encrypted, relying on this TLS technology. But unless special measures are taken, even though we've got all the sites we talk to are HTTPS, unless we do something special, all of our browser's DNS queries to those websites and all other domains, each of the pages we receive from those websites, and as we know, sometimes that could be hundreds of subsidiary domain queries because of all of the junk that is coming in from all corners. Every one of those pages spews forth a storm of unencrypted UDP packets carrying a DNS query formatted payload in order to, so outbound is the domain name that our browser needs to get the IP address for, and the response is an IP or a collection of IPs where we can access that resource. They're all unencrypted. They're all in the clear. So the concern has been that anybody passively monitoring our traffic, like our ISP, who's like first step off of our connection as our data goes out to the internet, or anyone passively monitoring our connection is able to see everything that we're doing, not into our connection, but they know where we're going based on the queries that we're making. But then also it means that because it's unencrypted and unauthenticated by default, any active interception can manipulate the DNS replies to send our browser to some other server. And if that other server has arranged to obtain a certificate that we trust, and unfortunately, with so many certificate authorities globally now, and our browsers trusting all of them, that's not a stretch, especially if the entity doing the interception is highly placed. Then we don't really have any security. So we've talked in the past about how Mozilla and Firefox and Google with Chrome are moving toward this idea of doing DNS in a different way, of tunneling DNS queries over TLS to a remote DNS server that establishes a single connection. So in this mode, which is described in RFC 8484, the browser no longer hands the job of DNS lookups over to its host operating system. That's what all of our browsers do now, is the OSs do that job for the browser. Our OS has a DNS cache. It has a DNS resolver. So the browser just makes a query through an OS API saying, hey, look this IP up for me. That goes to the operating system, and it's our network adapters then that know the IP is to query for DNS. They typically get that by making a DHCP, Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol query, to typically our router that we have for our local environment. It may be a DNS server itself, but more often it's just passing through the IPs that it in turn received when it made a DHCP query to our ISP. using our ISP's DNS, which makes sense because we want the answer to come back quickly, and you want a DNS server to be close to you so that you're not, because all of your connections wait on getting the IP to connect to after sending out DNS queries. So DNS response time is very important. So about a year ago, about a year and a half ago, actually, Mozilla began experimenting with this. We talked about it at the time, and it was, by every measure, a complete success. That is the idea of establishing a connection to an HTTPS connection to a what's known as a DOH, DNS over HTTP, a DOH provider, and then tunneling the same lookups through that connection. So what that means is the browser no longer asks the OS, it itself establishes the connection. So what this provides, of course, is complete protection from DNS UDP passive monitoring or active interception. Cloudflare offers a service. Google offers a service. Quad9 offers a service. So there are multiple places now that have providers that are well-connected, global, and offering DNS over HTTPS. And it turns out, for example, Firefox, in Firefox, go to Options in the browser's menu, scroll to the bottom of the first general page that is displayed, click on Settings there under Network Settings, and at the bottom of the dialog that pops up, you'll find a checkbox, Enable DNS over HTTPS. So you put a check in the box, and unless you have some reason for choosing some other DNS provider, you leave it set to Cloudflare, which Mozilla has established a relationship with for this purpose. And now all of your DNS queries are, so at that point, when you turn that checkbox on, your Firefox opens up a single persistent connection to a local Cloudflare endpoint using their global geolocation aware technology so that you're connecting to someone relatively close to you, and all DNS goes through this HTTPS tunnel and is replied to. So from someone passively monitoring your bandwidth, whether they're on the intranet or out close to you like your ISP on the internet, suddenly like, oh, what happened to DNS? This person's not making DNS queries like they used to before. Okay, so that seems all good. What's the problem? Believe it or not, entities in the UK are all up in arms.
They were pissed off.
Yes.
They called them the internet enemy.
I know, Leo. They're
By the way, as soon as I read that article, I started using Firefox. I said, that's it. If they're the enemy of the internet, I'm using them. Holy cow.
I know. The ISPA, the Internet Service Providers Association, has named Mozilla one of the 3 finalists for their Internet Villain of the Year.
They're villains.
For quote, I'm quoting them, their proposed approach, that is there, as in Mozilla's, proposed approach to introduce DNS over HTTPS in such a way as to bypass UK filtering obligations and parental controls, undermining internet safety standards in the UK.
Shocking.
And Leo, okay, so I'm at this, I go to this ISPA page, the Internet Service Providers Association, as I'm pulling the pieces of this thing together, and I just had to shake my head when at the bottom right-hand corner, I was presented with this pop-up that I have in the show notes here. It says down in the lower right-hand corner for me, oh, and you got it too.
Yeah, because I'm using Firefox.
It says, So this is the ISPA, right? Who's upset that Mozilla is going to be tunneling DNS over HTTPS for all the benefits that we just outlined. The pop-up reads, "It looks like your cookies are switched off.
Oh, yeah.
To ensure the best experience whilst visiting our website,
So British.
please consider allowing cookies."
Yes.
You can find out how to change your settings or more about cookies we use at the bottom of this page. Unfortunately, I think it was covered up by the notice.
I don't see it. Yeah, I'm looking.
Yes, the ISPA has our best interests at heart. Wow. That's right.
Wow. Part of this is, remember that the UK wants to do this licensing system that if you don't get a license, you can't see porn on the internet. So because they're trying to keep porn out of kids' hands. So the people who are going to, one of the groups, you can go into a pub to get a license.
To monetize?
No, you can go to a pub to get a license. You have to prove so you have to go with your driver's license or some age proof, and then you get a license. It allows you to surf the internet freely. One of the people who is doing this is a company called MindGeek, which runs YouPorn, and pretty much every porn site you ever heard of is run by MindGeek. So you have to what could possibly go wrong? Go to a MindGeek site, give them your driver's license, your passport, proof of age, and they will give you a license to use the internet freely. This is such a bad idea.
And I do think I remember seeing somewhere as I was just scanning this that they want your phone number as well.
Oh yeah, all sorts of stuff. The funny thing is they passed this bill and were about to implement it when they realized they hadn't told the EU, because they thought, well, by now we'll be out of the EU. So they had to stop. They're not. So among all the other Brexit problems, this is another one. They actually had to put this change off until either they tell the EU about it or they're not in the EU anymore. And I don't think the EU will allow it. So it's just a mess. It's such a mess. Oh my God.
So, well, yeah, and so here we have a problem. We're advancing privacy and security for web browser users, yet the other side of this is that so what I from the research I did in the UK, ISPs are legally forced to block certain types of websites,
right.
Such as those hosting copyright infringing or trademark content. Some ISPs also block other sites at their discretion, such as those that show extremist content, adult images, child pornography, and so forth. These latter blocks are voluntary and are not the same across the UK, but most ISPs usually tend to block child abuse content, which seems like a good thing. Unfortunately, of course, we all know that this isn't a strong protection anyway. I mean, so the idea being that there are filters that the ISP manages that match on known domain names and do not return an IP address or return, some placeholder IP, redirection page if you try to get that. In mid-May, Baroness Thornton, MP for the Labour Party, brought up the DOH protocol and its impending support from browser makers in a session of the House of Commons, calling it a threat to the UK's online safety. And similarly, GCHQ, Britain's intelligence service that we'll be talking about later in the podcast, has also criticized both Google and Mozilla, claiming the new protocol would impede police investigations. And of course, I cued on that because they're like, wait a minute, how would this impede police investigations unless there was passive eavesdropping going on over on the wires that would cause matches? And then GCHQ continues saying could undermine its existing government protections against malicious websites. Okay, but how tunneling your DNS queries impede police investigations is really unclear. The Internet Watch Foundation, IFW, a British watchdog group, also with the declared mission to minimize the availability of online child sexual abuse content, also criticized both Google and Mozilla, claiming the browser makers were ruining years of work in protecting the British public from abusive content by providing a new method for accessing illegal content. Now, of course, remember that like any VPN does this, right? I mean, this is kind of a VPN for DNS, whereas in the way it's always been is that we just been spraying unencrypted UDP out onto the internet. Now it's in a browser tunnel. I mean, they're not able to see into HTTPS content. Now we're simply HTTPS tunneling DNS queries. So, yeah, that's like, but it's a new method for accessing illegal content. In their coverage of this, ZDNet noted that essentially Google and Mozilla's support for DOH effectively narrows down to the same moral dilemma that surrounds the Tor project and the Tor network, which, yes, it upsets people because it allows people to be anonymous. Browser makers, ZDNet wrote, browser makers must now decide if it's worth supporting a tool that brings privacy improvements to millions at the expense of a few that may have to suffer. When ZDNet asked Mozilla for a comment on its nomination, right, the Villain of the Year nomination, Mozilla replied, quote, "We're surprised and disappointed that an industry association for ISPs decided to misrepresent an improvement to decades-old internet infrastructure. Despite claims to the contrary, a more private DNS would not prevent the use of content filtering or parental controls in the UK. DNS over HTTPS, DOH, would offer real security benefits to UK citizens. Our goal is to build a more secure internet, and we continue to have a serious, constructive conversation with credible stakeholders in the UK about how to do that," Mozilla said. "We have no current plans to enable DOH by default in the UK. However, we are currently exploring potential DOH partners in Europe to bring this important security feature to other Europeans more broadly." I was unable to see anything that definitively talked about Mozilla's plans for default enablement. We do know, one of my favorite coined terms is the tyranny of the default. We know that most users will never dig down into any of their browser settings and flip any switches. So our listeners and you, Leo, and I, we have DNS over HTTPS. I just explained how to do it if you are a Firefox user, and it's coming soon to a Chrome browser and probably a Chromium-based browser near you, which expands that field even more broadly. So it's a matter of turning that switch on. What really matters then is whether our browser vendors decide to make it the default. And so what Mozilla is saying is no. Well, okay, we have no plans to make it the default in the UK. I don't know whether that will change over time. Who knows what? But again, I thought this was a perfect example of where, yes, just improving things, making things more secure and private does have, generate some backlash. And unfortunately, Mozilla, there are two other contenders for Villain of the Year that the this association has named. Well, we'll see who ends up getting
Mozilla from the list, because as of today, the ISPA has withdrawn.
Oh, yay!
Mozilla. I think they were a little stung. In the 21 years the event has been running, it is probably fair to say that no other nomination has generated such strong opinion. And then they go on to show all the great things. The villain category is intended to draw attention to an important issue in a light-hearted manner. But this year, we clearly sent the wrong message, one that doesn't reflect our genuine desire to engage in constructive dialogue. We are therefore withdrawing the Mozilla nomination.
Yeah.
We still think it's important to scrutinize the plans. And they say, data protection, security, online safety, user choice, user consent. You've got to pay attention, Mozilla. So they got their attention. I mean, the award ceremony is day after tomorrow, in case you're curious.
What this certainly does is, if they want to impose these sorts of filters, they'll have to do it in a different fashion. But it is certainly, I mean, it's not robust to use DNS anyway. So this probably means they will end up with better filtering of the stuff they want to filter, and the vast majority of people will end up with way more privacy.